In today's episode, we're diving into 5 people who were eaten alive by snakes. From a python breeder whose financial desperation led to a fatal feeding mistake, to a wildlife photographer who got too close for the perfect shot. But first, let's begin with the first story, where one man's overconfidence with his prized python cost him everything. It was November 8, 2015. And the humid Miami evening air hung thick around the modest suburban home where Marcus Rodriguez ran his exotic snake breeding operation. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the converted garage that housed his collection of massive Burmese pythons. Inside the climate-controlled space, the soft hum of heating lamps mixed with the occasional rustle of scales against glass. This was Marcus's world, a carefully maintained ecosystem of predators that had become both his passion and his livelihood. At 29, Marcus had been working with exotic snakes for 7 years, building a reputation among collectors for breeding some of the largest and most impressive Burmese pythons in South Florida. His operation had once been thriving, with custom-built enclosures lining the walls and a steady stream of buyers willing to pay premium prices for his specimens. But recent months had been brutal. A messy divorce had drained his savings, legal fees had piled up, and the exotic pet market had grown increasingly competitive. To cut costs, Marcus had started working alone, dismissing the assistant who used to help him handle the larger snakes during feeding time. The garage held 6 massive pythons, but none compared to Medusa, his prized 18-foot female that had become the centerpiece of his breeding program. She was a magnificent specimen, her golden and brown patterns perfectly defined, her body thick with muscle that rippled beneath her scales. At nearly 200 pounds, she was one of the largest Burmese pythons in private hands, and Marcus had turned down multiple offers from collectors who wanted to buy her. But maintaining such a massive snake was expensive, and with money tight, he had been stretching feeding schedules longer than he should have. Burmese pythons are among the largest snakes in the world, capable of reaching lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 250 pounds. Native to Southeast Asia, they are powerful constrictors that kill their prey by wrapping their muscular bodies around victims and squeezing with tremendous force, up to 90 pounds of pressure per square inch. When hungry, they become increasingly aggressive and opportunistic, striking at anything that moves within range. Their feeding response is triggered by warmth and movement, and once activated, they attack with lightning speed and devastating power. That evening, Marcus entered Medusa's enclosure carrying a dead pig, her first substantial meal in 3 weeks. Financial pressures had forced him to reduce feeding frequency, and he knew she was desperately hungry. The massive python was coiled in the corner of her enclosure, her head raised and alert, tongue flicking rapidly as she sensed the approaching food. Marcus should have used his handling tools, the long hooks and tubes designed to keep handlers at safe distances from large constrictors. Instead, he approached directly, the pig slung over his shoulder, wanting to get the feeding done quickly. Medusa's strike was instantaneous and devastating. Instead of targeting the pig, the starving python launched herself at Marcus, her massive head slamming into his chest with bone-crushing force. Her jaws clamped around his torso as her body began to coil around him with terrifying speed. Marcus dropped the pig and tried to pull away, but 200 pounds of muscle was already wrapping around his ribcage and neck. The python's coils tightened with each breath he took, her powerful muscles contracting in the ancient rhythm of constriction. The pressure was immense and unrelenting. Marcus's ribs began to crack under the strain as Medusa's body wound around him like a living vice. Each time he exhaled, the coils tightened further, preventing him from drawing another full breath. His struggles only triggered the snake's instincts to squeeze harder, her muscles responding to his movements with increased pressure. The constriction compressed his chest cavity, crushing his lungs and heart, while simultaneously cutting off blood flow to his brain. Within minutes, Marcus's movements became weaker, then stopped entirely. Medusa maintained her grip for nearly an hour after he died, her body still coiled around his lifeless form in the dim light of the enclosure. It wasn't until the following afternoon that a concerned neighbor, who hadn't seen Marcus all day, called police for a welfare check. Officers discovered his body still wrapped in the python's deadly embrace, the massive snake showing no signs of releasing her grip. The Miami-Dade Police Department's investigation ruled the death accidental, citing improper handling procedures and the victim's decision to work alone with a dangerously large snake. Animal control officers removed all 6 pythons from the property, with Medusa being relocated to a licensed facility. The incident prompted new regulations for exotic pet dealers in Florida, requiring safety protocols and backup personnel when handling large constrictors. Marcus's death sent shockwaves through the exotic pet community, where he had been well known and respected. His funeral was attended by dozens of fellow breeders and collectors, who remembered him as passionate but increasingly reckless in his final months. The financial pressures that led to his fatal mistake became a cautionary tale whispered among handlers who understood how easily desperation could override decades of experience. But Marcus wasn't the only expert who underestimated a giant snake. Dr. May Chen's research in the Amazon rainforest brought her face to face with an even larger predator. It was June 14, 2017, and the Amazon rainforest of Peru pulsed with life in the oppressive afternoon heat. Deep in the remote Pacaya-Samiria National Reserve, where the canopy blocked most sunlight and the air hung thick with moisture, Dr. May Chen moved carefully along a muddy riverbank. The sounds of the jungle surrounded her, the distant calls of howler monkeys, the splash of caimans in the water, and the constant buzz of insects. This was exactly where she wanted to be, alone in one of the world's most biodiverse ecosystems, tracking the behavior patterns of South America's apex serpent predator. At 35, May was a respected herpetologist from UC Berkeley who had dedicated her career to studying dangerous snakes in their natural habitats. She had spent 8 years researching venomous and constrictor species across South America, publishing papers that had advanced the scientific understanding of anaconda behavior. Her colleagues knew her as fearless, sometimes to a fault, willing to take risks that other researchers avoided. She preferred working alone, believing that human presence altered snake behavior, and had developed techniques for approaching and documenting these massive predators that few others would attempt. This expedition was part of a 3-month study funded by the National Geographic Society, focusing on green anaconda hunting patterns and territorial behavior. May had been in the field for 6 weeks, documenting several smaller anacondas, but she was hoping to encounter one of the true giants, a mature female that could reach lengths over 20 feet. Green anacondas are the heaviest snakes in the world, with large females capable of weighing over 400 pounds and reaching lengths of 25 feet or more. They are semi-aquatic constrictors that prefer slow-moving rivers and swamps, where they hunt caimans, capybaras, and other large prey. Unlike their smaller cousins, green anacondas are incredibly powerful swimmers and can remain submerged for up to 10 minutes while stalking prey. When threatened, they become extremely aggressive, using their massive size and strength to overpower anything they perceive as a threat. That afternoon, May discovered what she had been searching for: a massive female green anaconda sunning herself on a fallen log near the water's edge. The snake was enormous, easily 20 feet long and thick as a telephone pole, her dark green body marked with distinctive black oval patterns. May estimated her weight at over 300 pounds, making this one of the largest anacondas she had ever encountered in the wild. The attack came without warning. The massive anaconda exploded from her position with shocking speed, her enormous head striking May in the chest and knocking her backward toward the water. Before May could react, 300 pounds of muscle was wrapping around her body, the snake's coils encircling her torso and legs with crushing force. The anaconda's momentum carried both of them into the river, where the snake's natural advantage became overwhelming. In the murky water, the anaconda's grip tightened with each of May's struggles. The massive snake used her powerful body to drag May deeper, away from the shore, while simultaneously beginning the deadly process of constriction. May's research radio, clipped to her belt, transmitted her desperate calls for help, but her remote location meant no one could respond in time. The anaconda's coils compressed her chest and abdomen, making breathing impossible, while the snake's weight held her underwater. The constriction continued for nearly 20 minutes as the anaconda methodically squeezed the life from her victim. May's movements grew weaker, then stopped entirely, but the massive snake maintained her grip, instinctively ensuring her perceived threat was completely neutralized. May's research team began searching when she failed to return to base camp that evening. They found her equipment scattered along the riverbank 3 days later, but her body was never recovered. The Peruvian authorities conducted a brief investigation, ruling May's death an occupational hazard of field research. Her university established new safety protocols requiring researchers to work in pairs when studying large predators. May's death devastated the herpetological community, where she was remembered as a brilliant scientist whose passion for her work ultimately led to her demise. Her family established a scholarship fund for young researchers, hoping to continue her legacy while emphasizing the importance of safety in dangerous fieldwork. But not all deadly snake encounters happen in remote wilderness areas. Pastor William Hayes discovered that faith alone couldn't protect him from one of America's most venomous serpents. It was September 3rd, 2016, and the small Pentecostal church in rural Kentucky sat quiet in the fading evening light. The white wooden building, surrounded by rolling hills and tobacco fields, had been Pastor William Hayes's spiritual home for over 2 decades. Inside, the simple sanctuary held just 20 pews, a modest altar, and a locked room behind the pulpit where Billy kept his collection of venomous snakes. The practice of snake handling had been part of his faith since he was a young man, and at 52, he had survived countless encounters with deadly serpents that would have killed most people. Billy Hayes had been handling venomous snakes in religious services for 20 years, following a tradition rooted in a literal interpretation of biblical scripture. His congregation had once numbered over 100 faithful believers, but changing times and several close calls with snake bites had reduced his flock to fewer than 30 regular attendees. In recent months, Billy had become increasingly desperate to prove his faith and reinvigorate his ministry, taking greater risks with larger and more aggressive snakes during services. The snake room behind his altar housed 6 venomous serpents, but none commanded more respect and fear than Rex, a massive eastern diamondback rattlesnake that Billy had acquired from a dealer in Georgia. The 6-foot male was one of the largest specimens of its species, with a body as thick as a man's arm and a rattle that could be heard across the sanctuary when agitated. Rex had never been handled during services, deemed too dangerous even by Billy's standards, but lately, the pastor had been considering incorporating the massive rattler into his demonstrations of faith. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, capable of reaching lengths over 7 feet and possessing enough venom to kill multiple adult humans. Their hemotoxic venom destroys blood cells and tissue, causing massive internal bleeding, organ failure, and excruciating pain. A single bite from a large specimen can inject enough venom to kill 20 people, and their strike speed is faster than the human eye can follow. They are notoriously aggressive when threatened and will strike repeatedly if cornered. That evening, Billy had come to the church alone for what he called a private prayer session. His congregation was dwindling, his faith was being questioned by other pastors in the area, and he felt called to prove his spiritual connection through an ultimate test. He unlocked the snake room and approached Rex's enclosure, where the massive rattlesnake lay coiled in the corner, his distinctive diamond-patterned scales catching the fluorescent light. The snake's head was raised, tongue flicking rapidly, and his tail buzzed ominously as Billy opened the cage. Billy reached into the enclosure without any protective equipment, believing his faith would shield him from harm. Rex immediately went into a defensive posture, coiling tighter and raising his head higher, his rattle creating a continuous warning sound that echoed through the small room. But Billy ignored these clear signs of aggression. Grasping the snake behind the head, and attempting to lift him from the cage. Rex's powerful body thrashed violently, his muscles straining against Billy's grip as the pastor tried to drape the massive serpent around his shoulders. The first strike came as Billy lifted Rex from the enclosure. The snake's head twisted with lightning speed, his fangs sinking deep into Billy's forearm and injecting a massive dose of venom directly into his bloodstream. Billy cried out but didn't release his grip, believing this was a test of his faith. Rex struck again immediately, this time catching Billy's neck just below his jaw, pumping even more venom into his victim's circulatory system. The hemotoxic venom began its devastating work within seconds. Billy's arm swelled rapidly around the first bite site, the tissue turning dark as blood vessels ruptured beneath his skin. The neck bite was even more dangerous, with venom spreading quickly toward his heart and brain. Billy staggered backward, finally releasing the snake, which immediately coiled in the corner and continued its aggressive display. Billy collapsed within minutes as the massive dose of venom overwhelmed his system. His blood pressure plummeted as internal bleeding began throughout his body. His organs started shutting down one by one, first his kidneys, then his liver, as the venom destroyed tissue faster than his body could repair it. With no one present to call for emergency medical help, Billy died alone on the floor of his church, his body convulsing as the venom completed its deadly work. Rex remained coiled in the corner, his rattle still buzzing softly, when Billy's wife found his body the next morning. She had come to the church looking for her husband after he failed to return home the previous night. The massive rattlesnake was still alive and aggressive, requiring animal control officers with specialized equipment to safely remove him from the building. The Kentucky State Police investigation ruled Billy's death accidental, noting that he had violated basic safety protocols for handling venomous snakes. The church's snake handling license was revoked, and the remaining serpents were relocated to licensed facilities. Billy's death made national news, reigniting debates about religious snake handling practices and their inherent dangers. Billy's funeral drew hundreds of mourners from across the region, including many who had opposed his snake handling practices but respected his dedication to his faith. His congregation disbanded after his death, unable to continue without their charismatic leader, and the small church building was eventually sold to another denomination. But religious conviction wasn't the only thing that led people to take deadly risks with dangerous snakes. Mike Morrison's desire to impress his girlfriend with his snake handling skills proved equally fatal. It was March 27, 2014, and the afternoon sun beat down on the rural Texas property where Mike Morrison and his girlfriend Lisa kept their collection of exotic snakes. Their converted barn housed over a dozen large constrictors, from ball pythons to massive reticulated pythons, but the crown jewel of their collection was an African rock python named Titan. The 16-foot male was one of the most aggressive snakes they owned, requiring extreme caution during any interaction. Mike had been looking forward to this day for weeks. Lisa was at work, giving him the perfect opportunity to clean Titan's enclosure and document his bravery with photos that would surely impress her. At 31, Mike was a construction worker with no formal training in snake handling, but he had been keeping large pythons for 5 years and considered himself an expert. His confidence had grown with each successful interaction, and he had developed a reputation among friends for his willingness to handle snakes that others wouldn't dare approach. Mike took pride in working without protective equipment, believing that real snake handlers didn't need tools to prove their mastery. He often posted videos on social media showing himself handling his largest snakes bare-handed, garnering likes and comments that fed his growing ego. The barn was sweltering in the Texas heat, and Mike could hear Titan moving restlessly in his custom-built enclosure. The massive python had been increasingly aggressive lately, striking at the glass whenever anyone approached, and Mike knew the snake was stressed by captivity. African rock pythons were notoriously difficult to keep, requiring specific temperature and humidity conditions that were hard to maintain in rural Texas. But Mike was determined to clean the enclosure today, and he wanted to get photos of himself handling the 150-pound serpent to show Lisa when she returned from work. African rock pythons are among the most aggressive python species in the world, known for their unpredictable temperament and powerful constricting ability. Native to sub-Saharan Africa, they can reach lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 200 pounds. Unlike their more docile cousins, African rock pythons retain their wild instincts even in captivity, viewing humans as potential threats or prey. Their strike speed is exceptional, and once they begin constricting, their grip is nearly impossible to break without multiple people and proper tools. Mike entered Titan's room carrying his phone to record the encounter, planning to capture footage of himself moving the massive snake by hand. The python was coiled in the far corner of his enclosure, his thick body forming tight loops, his head raised and alert. Mike could see the aggression in the snake's posture, the way his muscles tensed beneath his scales, the rapid tongue flicking, the slight swaying motion that preceded a strike. But Mike's overconfidence overrode his caution, and he approached the enclosure believing he could handle any situation that arose. The moment Mike opened the enclosure door, Titan exploded into action. The massive python launched himself across the space with shocking speed, his powerful body slamming into Mike's chest and knocking him backward against the wall. Before Mike could react, 150 pounds of muscle was wrapping around his torso, the snake's coils encircling his ribcage and arms with crushing force. Mike's phone clattered to the floor as he tried desperately to pull free, but Titan's grip only tightened with each struggle. The python's coils worked with methodical precision, each loop of his body finding purchase around Mike's chest and neck. The constricting pressure was immense, compressing Mike's lungs and preventing him from drawing breath. His ribs began to crack under the strain as Titan's muscles contracted in powerful waves, each squeeze tighter than the last. Mike's struggles grew weaker as oxygen deprivation set in, his vision blurring as the snake's deadly embrace continued. Mike's screams had alerted the neighbors, but by the time they called 911, it was too late. The constriction had crushed his chest cavity, stopping his heart and collapsing his lungs. When Lisa returned home an hour later, she found paramedics trying unsuccessfully to separate Mike's body from the python's grip. Titan had to be killed with a captive bolt gun before Mike's remains could be removed, the massive snake maintaining his death grip even after his victim had died. The investigation revealed that Mike had violated every basic safety protocol for handling large constrictors. Texas authorities removed all the snakes from the property, and several were found to be illegally obtained. Lisa was charged with multiple violations of exotic animal regulations, though charges were later reduced due to her cooperation with investigators. Mike's death sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic pet ownership in Texas. His funeral was attended by dozens of friends and co-workers who remembered him as fearless but increasingly reckless in his final months. The construction company where he worked established a safety fund in his memory, emphasizing the importance of proper training and equipment in dangerous situations. But even professional wildlife photographers weren't immune to the deadly allure of getting too close to giant snakes. David Thompson's quest for the perfect shot in the Florida Everglades would cost him everything. It was August 11, 2013, and the Florida Everglades shimmered under the brutal summer sun, a vast expanse of sawgrass and cypress swamps that stretched to the horizon. Deep in the remote backcountry of Everglades National Park, where tourists rarely ventured and cell phone signals disappeared, freelance wildlife photographer David Thompson moved carefully along an abandoned trail. The air was thick with humidity and the buzz of mosquitoes, while the distant splash of alligators and the calls of wading birds created the soundtrack of America's most dangerous wilderness. At 38, David had built a reputation for capturing images that other photographers wouldn't attempt, getting impossibly close to dangerous wildlife through a combination of patience, skill, and calculated risk-taking. He had been documenting the invasive Burmese python problem in the Everglades for National Geographic, spending weeks alone in the swamps to photograph these massive Asian snakes that were devastating the native ecosystem. His work had already produced several award-winning images, but David was always pushing for something more dramatic, more intimate, more dangerous. The Everglades python invasion had reached crisis levels by 2013, with tens of thousands of the massive constrictors established throughout South Florida. These snakes, originally released or escaped from the exotic pet trade, had found perfect conditions in the subtropical swamps, growing to enormous sizes and reproducing rapidly. David's assignment was to document their impact on native wildlife, But he had become obsessed with capturing the perfect portrait of one of the true giants, a mature female that could exceed 18 feet in length. Burmese pythons in the Everglades often grow larger than their wild Asian counterparts. With unlimited prey and no natural predators to control their growth, females can reach lengths over 20 feet and weights exceeding 200 pounds, making them apex predators capable of killing alligators, deer, and even panthers. They are ambush hunters that rely on stealth and explosive striking power, remaining motionless for hours before attacking with lightning speed. Their heat-sensing abilities allow them to detect warm-blooded prey from considerable distances, and their constricting power can crush bones and stop hearts within minutes. That morning, David discovered what he had been searching for: a massive female Burmese python sunning herself on a remote trail deep in the park's interior. The snake was enormous, easily 15 feet long and thick as a telephone pole, her golden and brown patterns perfectly defined in the dappled sunlight. She appeared sluggish from the heat, her massive head resting on her coils, while her body stretched across the narrow path. David estimated her weight at nearly 180 pounds, making this one of the largest pythons he had encountered during months of fieldwork. David approached slowly, his camera equipment ready, believing the snake was too lethargic from the heat to pose any immediate threat. He had photographed dozens of large pythons during his career and felt confident in his ability to read their behavior and maintain safe distances. But as he moved closer, positioning himself for the intimate portrait he envisioned, he failed to recognize the subtle signs of alertness: the slight lifting of the snake's head, the way her tongue flicked more rapidly, the almost imperceptible tensing of muscles beneath her scales. The attack was swift and devastating. The massive python struck with explosive force, her head covering the distance between them faster than David could react. Her powerful jaws clamped around his thigh as her body began wrapping around his legs and torso with crushing strength. David's camera flew from his hands as he was pulled to the ground, 180 pounds of muscle coiling around him with methodical precision. The python's grip tightened with each of David's struggles, her powerful coils compressing his chest and abdomen, while simultaneously dragging him off the trail into dense vegetation. David's cries for help echoed through the empty swamp, but his remote location meant no one could hear his desperate calls. The snake's constricting pressure increased steadily, crushing his ribs and preventing him from drawing breath as she pulled him deeper into the undergrowth. Within minutes, David's movements ceased as the python's deadly embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. The massive snake maintained her grip for over an hour, ensuring her perceived threat was completely neutralized before beginning the slow process of consumption. Over the following days, the python methodically swallowed David's body entirely, her elastic jaws and expandable throat allowing her to consume prey much larger than her head. Park rangers began searching when David failed to check in at his scheduled time 3 days later. They found his camera equipment scattered along the remote trail, the memory cards revealing his final photographs of the massive python. But despite extensive searches involving helicopters and tracking dogs, David's body was never recovered. The python had likely consumed him completely and retreated deeper into the vast swamp, leaving no trace of her victim. The National Park Service investigation concluded that David had violated park safety protocols by working alone in remote areas and approaching dangerous wildlife too closely. New regulations were implemented requiring photographers to work with guides when documenting large predators, and warning signs were posted throughout python habitat areas. David's disappearance sent shockwaves through the wildlife photography community, where he was remembered as talented but increasingly reckless in his pursuit of dramatic images. His final photographs were published posthumously, serving as both a tribute to his skill and a warning about the dangers of getting too close to apex predators. Thanks for watching. Just when you think you understand the power of these massive serpents, we're just getting started. Click the next video for the next stories that will show you why nature's most beautiful creatures are also its most lethal predators.